Welcome everyone to the 14th Zoom fan history session from fanac.org. We are going to have special guests of Joe and Gay Haldeman to talk about both their fannish and some of their professional careers. But since we do this as a fan history project, we will be focusing on that. I'm going to start this with something, and I thought we normally have a participant in the audience, Cheryl Burkhead, and I think she may be coming in a little bit later, but to show how fandom has grayed just a little bit, I'm going to mention that Cheryl introduced me to Joe and Gay, along with Jay and Allie, 50 years ago in Los Angeles at the WorldCon, LACon 1. So over that time, we've occasionally had some different and sometimes extensive talks, but hopefully we'll be able to cover all kinds of things this time. And also, hopefully you guys will be able to ask some questions that you always wanted to know. So I'm going to start back at the beginning. Joe and Gay, you decide who wants to talk first, but what really got you started in science fiction fandom?
Well, I can tell you when I got started, I suppose it was when we went to the Discon in 1963. I went into the fan room, and this is the day the con opened, and there was nobody really around. So I just went and filled my arms literally up with fanzines because they were free. You know,
they
what
were
do you
giving
want?
them away.
They're giving away fanzines and flyers for cons and things like that. And so I just got armloads of them, sat down and started reading them. And so I got my first introduction to fannishness rather directly that way. And basically I was wandering around. I met John W. Campbell because he was also an early riser. So he's just sitting around, you know, wishing he could have a smoke. And I don't know, are you John W. Campbell? Well, yes, of course I am, you asshole. And just started, he started talking immediately. And if you remember him, you know this, obviously. He went into the lecture mode immediately. And he started telling me all about the truth of the American Indians. And, you know, not exactly PC. And I just sort of wandered around with him, smoking and looking. Yeah, come to think of it, back then you could smoke in the convention hall. So that was, I'm sure John was smoking in his little cigarette holder. And
We found out about, this is 1963, the Discon. We lived in Bethesda, Maryland, not far away. We read about it in Analog magazine. Joe did, I guess.
Yeah.
In Analog, and said, well, wow, let's, why don't we go? So we just went down and signed up and went in. And my first introduction to fannish fandom was walking into that hotel. I remembered it at the Shoreham, but somebody at the convention this year reminded me it was a different hotel. But we walked into the lobby, and there was Isaac Asimov and L. Sprague de Camp in business suits fencing across the lobby.
yeah,
It was fascinating. So that was our introduction. And we brought a bunch of friends with us, and we went home, made up costumes, and came back for the masquerade. Sounded like a good idea at the time. And that was our introduction to convention fandom.
The sounds like a pretty interesting introduction. It's always nice to find out how people get started, because everybody is so different, and we all remember it differently.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask a question maybe before that. How did you guys meet?
We met at a dance, at a Valentine's Day dance. All very middle-class American. My brother and I had helped set up the dance.
And I had helped from the Job. It was Job's Daughters and Nebulas, if you're familiar with that, Masonic organizations. And I'd helped set it up from the girls' side, and he'd helped set it up from the boys.
I felt obligated to go since it was,
Me too.
you know, and although neither of us was much of a party person, we sat down with our punch and started talking, and it was
They told us to sit down.
yeah.
And so we all sat down, and we didn't know too many other people. And I happened to sit next to this guy, and he made me laugh from the beginning. He was so funny. We played this little game, and he kept pulling the stuff off the game, and I was in hysterics. And I thought, oh, what a nice guy. But he knew all the other girls. And so I figured, well, he's not going to pay attention to me. So we got up from this and went on. And here he comes with a glass of punch. The beginning of 70 years togetherness.
Oh, you focused right away, Joe.
Oh, yeah.
He went home and told his brother, you stay away from her.
Yeah.
Jay had a habit of stealing Joe's girlfriends back then. I was only 15,
15.
and Joe was 17. We were young.
Yeah.
But then he handed me a book one time early, one of his favorite books. It was a book of
Short stories.
called
Arthur Clarke.
Expedition to Earth.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I read it and I loved it.
Yeah. So
It's a good
You
thing.
know.
I didn't know it was going to be a test. I just liked the book.
Well, you passed.
I passed.
yeah.
Phew.
Let me ask you a question, if I can, about Jay. Did Jay find fandom at the same time as you guys did?
I think about
We did it all together.
very close.
Yeah.
Although Jay might have known more about fandom early on because of his publishing.
Mhm.
He knew fanzines before we did.
Yeah. Now he
Oh,
may,
really?
Or it
he
might
may
been-
have discovered, I think he discovered them when we did it, the dealer's room at Discon.
Okay.
I think he did. And from there he went whoop and started doing his own. I think.
So how did you guys get involved with the DC fan activities, which, well, started at a WorldCon and kept on going until you were running another one? At
Yeah,
least.
just not being able to quit, I think.
We did not learn about WSFA, the Washington Science Fiction Association, at the convention,
No.
but Joe had a class, you tell.
Well, I was taking summer school. I was transferring from the University of Oklahoma to Maryland. And in between, I went to summer school at American University, which is a private university in the DC area.
Mhm.
And I was sitting in a classroom, before class started, and I was reading Analog magazine. And that was the big size analog that you probably don't recall, but it was a transitional period. There's very large sheets of very well illustrated, beautiful thing.
Mhm.
Anyhow, so this girl who was being hit on by some other person in the class saw that magazine and she rushed over to, just to get rid of that other guy. He said, "Oh, you read Analog magazine?" And I'm going, "Well, yeah, who doesn't?" And so we just started talking, and she told me about a club meeting of the Washington Science Fiction Association. And I thought, well, I'll tell my brother about this. And he and I both went to the next meeting.
And I did.
With Gay, yeah. I mean, it was a very weird kind of social thing. But so Jay wound up marrying her. And
That was Alice.
yeah. Yeah. So interesting. It's all very fannish.
Yeah.
So you ended up rescuing the woman who became his wife.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's all, as you said, everything is a little bit strange with you guys. That was a period where between the two World Cons was a period where DC fans, a number of them sort of gaffiated, and other people started coming in. Can you tell us some of the people you remember from the 60s?
Bob Pavlet. Bob and Peggy Pavlet. Peggy was not Peggy Pavlet yet, but she was about to be.
Who was the little old lady where we?
Elizabeth Cullen.
Elizabeth Cullen.
It was her house where
Yeah.
we met. And she was quite old.
Yeah.
I don't know, 20, I don't know. She was quite old.
I mean, almost as old as us now, but
Lived in this rambling, wonderful old house.
yeah.
Well,
And that's where the club met. And one day we said, we could help her. Let's go down. A whole bunch of us went down to just clean house. And her family had moved her into a home, and we didn't know.
oh,
That was a heartbreaker. It really was.
Yeah.
We just didn't know. We should have done it a lot sooner. But that's where we met. And let's see. You mentioned a few names here that we remember. Bill Evans, of course.
Mhm.
He married after Peggy Ray's father died. He married Peggy Ray's mother. Is that right? I think that's right.
Yeah.
So we knew them pretty well. We knew the Pavlets quite well. We were godparents to Missy, their daughter.
no,
Let's see. Don Miller, you mentioned, he ran did the fanzine, did the Wistful Journal.
yeah, he used to do a lot of fanzines.
Mhm.
Seemed like he was coming out with a new fanzine about every week.
He was fanatic.
Mm.
And since George Siddes had run the 63 Discon, did he stay involved or did he move away?
He lived in Philadelphia.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether he moved after that or whether he was in DC before. We just don't know what
We saw him every now and then, but there was a pretty
Excuse me.
universal exchange of people from Boston, Washington, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, that
Yeah, we just
gang.
Yeah, I do remember even when I was in New York, fandom in the 70s, that people used to drive up from DC and Baltimore just for a club meeting,
Right.
Yeah.
as well as for conventions, of course. We used to all shuttle back and forth.
Yeah.
The convention circuit that you did, because you guys not only go to conventions along the East Coast of the United States, you're, well, pretty much worldwide fans. How did you, where did you start going to conventions regularly?
as soon
Yes, I
as
know.
after Discon, we needed another convention. We enjoyed it so much.
Well, I'm thinking about the first Eurocon.
Mhm.
Long later.
Well, that's a lot later, but when I started to think of myself as a fandom fan was when it became international for us. And I thought,
Really?
well, hell, we can use this as an excuse to go anywhere in the world and pay,
Right.
just take it off our income tax.
So we went to Eurocon in Grenoble, France in 1974, and Joe's first story had just come out in
Yeah.
Galaxy in
Yeah.
French. So here's this famous American writer. I think he hadn't.
It was so strange because in this room full of science fiction fans, I was the big shot, and I had one story in France and one in Germany, and that was it. But nobody else there was published at all, hardly.
Well,
And since I was published I'd had a couple of stories in the States, and that was a big deal then.
The Forever War wasn't out yet,
No, I didn't. My first novel hadn't come out.
but the fans were wonderful, and they
Yeah.
spoke all different languages.
Oh yeah.
They would you'd go into a room and whoever came in the room, they switched languages. That was so much fun for
Yeah.
me because I speak Spanish and get by in French. And it was just so much fun. And I met this Italian guy just sitting on the floor. He didn't speak much French and my French wasn't good, but we discovered that we could speak French to each other because our bad French was fine. He didn't speak any English. And so I spent the evening talking to this guy. And then many years later, we were at a convention in Ireland and he sees us across the room and he comes running over. He'd been Joe's Italian editor all along for his books and stuff, but we had not made that connection. We didn't know it was us and we didn't know it was him.
Yeah.
Very strange. Anyway.
Do you remember his name?
Gianfranco
Yeah.
Viviani.
Gianfranco Viviani. He's
Mhm.
passed away, unfortunately.
Okay.
Also, in answer to that convention question, because we were on the East Coast, there were lots of conventions. There
Yeah.
was PhilCon. We always went to PhilCon in Philadelphia. We went to LunaCon every year. We went to, what else did we go to? We just went to every convention we could get to.
Balticon.
Balticon, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
When did you start going to conventions in the Midwest? Because I know a lot of Midwest fans think that you are really Midwest fans, despite where you came from.
We went to Iowa in 1973 to go to the Iowa Writers Workshop. Joe was in the Iowa Writers Workshop. Of course, then there was MiniCon,
Oh, yeah.
Shambanacon.
WisCon.
We didn't go to WisCon. I don't know if WisCon existed yet.
Well, we went to the first one, the featured nude swimming party with the pool full of minnows. That was different.
That was
Is that Wisconsin?
no,
I thought it was Wisconsin.
no, I don't think so.
It was Wisconsin anyhow.
I don't remember. I remember one Wisconsin convention. I don't know if it was a Wisconsin. We loved MiniCon. MiniCon was next door. It was 300 miles away, but it was next door.
Yeah, by Midwest standards. Yeah.
The funnest thing was Joe taught a science fiction class as a graduate student. And MiniCon was coming up. And he said to the class, anybody want to go to a science fiction convention? He was teaching science fiction writing. We piled more than half the class into the van and all their cars and drove to MiniCon, and they shared a room. They all crashed, I think, in one room or two rooms. And we just had the best time. That was a wonderful convention. And they came home and they said, I think we should have a convention. This grew out of Joe's science fiction class.
Yeah.
And the class met in the mill in Iowa City on Wednesday, was it Wednesday nights? At one day a week and at 5 o'clock at the mill in the back room. So for at least 30 years, they continued to meet on Wednesdays in the mill and became the Science Fiction League of Iowa students. And then of course grew up but kept on meeting. And they decided to have a convention. So we had Icon in 75, I believe it was.
Mhm.
And then, they're still having the Icons in Iowa City and Cedar Rapids ever since. And out of the Icons grew the Demicons. So I have a mug that says grandparents of Demicon,
Yeah.
as it grew out of that one science fiction class.
Well, you guys have introduced many people to science fiction, or introduced, gotten a lot of people to be more socially adept at science fiction conventions. Edie finds Gay to be her idol because she found that Gay has a tendency to find many fans who a lot of us get annoyed with and suddenly make them real people and socialized. And Edie has tried to follow that model.
They need us, Edie, they need us.
Jay was, let's go back to DC, and I'm going to ask you another question about Jay. He was chair of Discon, Um, how did the Worldcon affect you? I know that Joe was part of the program group, and how did you interact with the fans to get things going? I know that certainly changed my attitude about things when I did programming at my first Worldcon.
Well, when I started working on programming, I was in Viet Nam, so I couldn't do much there except sort of send good thoughts overseas.
But they didn't get that convention. That was for 71,
right.
and they didn't win that one. And this DC
Right.
was 74.
74, yes.
And
70,
74, yeah.
yes.
But you were back a long time by then.
No, yeah.
So yeah, because I met you in 72 at the Worldcon. And then there was one in Toronto and then the one in DC. Was programming something that you enjoyed, or did you have, were you, by then you were writing,
Yeah.
weren't you? Yeah. And
I sort of enjoyed it, and I sort of thought it was an obligation that I had to do to stay famous. You know, to be a real pro, I had to be a good, friendly, available con guy.
well, I certainly remember reading material by you in Don Miller's fanzines in the Whisper Journal and things like that. So you were, as well as writing fiction, you were still writing for some fanzines at least.
Yeah. I wrote for Ray Fisher's Odd. In fact, I wrote for it while I was in Vietnam. That's the only,
Really?
I wrote a little thing for my brother too at the time. But yeah, that was my first, sort of big fannish writing thing. And then when I came back, I was writing for the short story magazines. I was writing for the science magazines. But I was not snobbish about putting stuff in fanzines. I thought, why not? When something was obviously fannish, that's what I did.
Did you ever think about publishing something for yourself, fannish-wise?
As a fanzine, publishing your own fanzine.
Oh, no, my brother did that.
He was such a fanatic, his brother.
Yeah, it was in our family, that was the division of labor. I was the professional writer and my brother was the fan publisher.
The politics of the time, and you're writing about particularly, I guess, the war year and such, how did that affect your interaction with fans? Because fans were pretty radical at that time, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, well, War Year was not a conservative book.
No, that's true.
And
well, neither of them were.
Yeah, but fans, even if they were political, they weren't exclusionary. Most fans didn't care about your politics if you were a real fan. I mean, they had their own little feuds and their personal animosities. But the fact that I was known as an anti-war
combat veteran,
that was odd, but
that was both sides.
It made me acceptable to both factions, or all five factions, depending on how you look at it. But yeah.
One reason he's as mentally healthy as he is that fandom just accepted him.
Right.
Nobody gave him any trouble. We had have Vietnam veteran friends who were called baby killers and had stuff thrown at them and all kinds of stuff. Joe never had that. And part of it is that fandom was just so accepting and supportive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember you were always willing to talk about a variety of things. I had, I remember one point where you and I were talking at a party and some people came in and they had to get up and leave because they thought it was a bit too heavy a conversation.
But yeah.
Joe, I'm going to ask you the question I did mention earlier. You've been interviewed more than Gay.
Mhm.
What would you like to ask her that you don't know about her?
Oh, let me.
Anything at all? I know you've been together a long time.
Yeah, if there's
61 years.
yeah, if there's anything I don't know by now, I probably don't want to know it.
Okay, well, Gay, is there anything you want to reveal? Otherwise, we can just go on to the next question.
He knows everything, and we know each other.
Okay. Before you went into the service, your fan activities, besides just going to clubs, was there anything else that you were doing or focused on? Was there any particular group or anything like that?
They're active in WISFA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very active. I was secretary. Jay was president.
Mhm.
Were you vice president for a
I was,
while?
yeah, I
I
had some
think?
sort of a, yeah.
We were very active in DC.
That's probably why Cheryl described you as she did. You were running things.
That's
Okay.
funny, because I'm not a runner myself. But I did use my brother's fan publishing to get
Mhm.
experience. I mean, he used me as a writer, and I drew little things for cartoons and things. So
Oh.
I got fan act from my family connections.
Jay is also Jack C. Haldeman, the second author as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
For any who might
Yes.
not know that. And was he published before you or
Uh,
soon after?
My brother was published before me, technically, because he was in this weird religious quarterly, and he was no more religious than I, but he was frantically searching for some place to get published before I did, and so he was in some Methodist youth journal with a poem, which was kind of a sort of Richard Berrigan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Watermelon sugar.
an odd.
Yeah, well, Joe was in Vietnam. What were you doing in fandom?
I stayed active in the club. I was at the University of Maryland in graduate school. So I was still in the area, and I stayed active in the club because my friends were there and they were so supportive and so helpful. It was wonderful. The Pavlets were wonderful to me. Ron Bounds and just everybody was great. And then
Thanks,
Peggy Ray and I went off to a PhilCon. What was that year? Must have been 68, 69. And neither one of us had been alone to a convention since either of us had been married. So we weren't going to go alone. So we went together and had a wonderful time. We spent most of the time with author Hal Clement, one on each side of him. He was about the least dangerous person.
Yeah.
And he was very shy and very stiff. So we decided we'd give him a lot of attention. And we did. He had Peggy on one side and me on the other for the whole convention. And he had a big grin on his face.
Yeah.
I'll bet he never told that to his wife.
I bet not. Well, we behaved ourselves and he was safe.
Oh, I didn't say you didn't or that he didn't, but that's not the kind of thing that his wife enjoyed.
Right.
That's right. She didn't
Hearing about.
He was
Yeah.
by himself. I also met Ben Boba at that convention, spent a long time talking to him. And he said,
Now, see, he would have liked you doing that.
Yeah.
He said, can I walk you back to the room? And I said, oh, I said, okay. And we went back to the room and he shook my hand and went off. And I went, that. But he was wonderful. He was such a gentleman and we love Ben. And Ben is directly responsible for a lot of the success, Joe's initial success,
Right.
for introducing us to the right people and stuff.
Ah,
Beverly
phone
Hills.
call.
That's not you from Beverly Hills.
No,
Stopping that. Okay. So anyway, while he was gone, I went to conventions, but not alone, and was active in WISFA and was so glad to have the club as support. Really was support. Because it was a scary time. He could have been killed. And almost was.
yes, I remember one of our talks. With all the years you've been in science fiction fandom, crossed your path that you didn't expect. Tell us about any of those, whether they were scientists or generals or other writers from other places, because, well, for example, Hemingway scholars.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, let's see. I'm trying to think whether I had any Hemingway connections that were science
Fannish.
fiction. See, I got involved with the Hemingway Society, just, I guess, almost not associated with science fiction at all.
Mm-hmm.
But they were like they were like science fiction fandom, except they were about Ernest Hemingway and the 20s and so forth.
We
But-
we were in Key West and there was a Hemingway conference going on and we found out, we were just there. So we just went to see what it was all about. And they had a buffet dinner. And so we got our food and we went and there was this big round table with one guy sitting
Yeah.
at it. And we said to the guy, can we join you? And he said, sure. So we sat down and the entire panel, all the authors, all the speakers came and sat at that table. And half of them already knew about the Forever War.
Yeah.
And the other half, their kids do.
Yeah.
It was just really strange. And Joe had read books by every single one of them because he likes Hemingway. So that made us part of the group. And we've been active in the Hemingway Society since then. So that's the Fannish connection. They read his book and he read theirs.
But there's a social connection too, in that people who are in an academic fandom are in something like science fiction fandom. That is to say, the social connections are
Mhm.
similar, even though the subject matter is not. And so it's funny, when this was down in Key West, we met all these people through being involved with Ernest Hemingway. And it was just like sitting down at a science fiction con, oh, hi, yeah, we're interested in the same stuff. And so you sit around and talk. It was curiously familiar and friendly.
It was wonderful. Another interesting connection that through fandom, we were at a Nebulas, I guess, and there's an autographing going on, and there's an astronaut over here, and Joe's over here, and I go over to the astronaut to pick up some of the freebie NASA stuff and introduce myself, and he said, Haldeman, is Joe Haldeman here? I said, yeah. He said, where's he? I showed him brought him over and introduced him to Joe, and that's Shel Lindgren, who's the commander of the SpaceX Crew 4 that's supposed to go up Tuesday, but is probably going up on Wednesday with luck. And so we're here in Titusville because we met Shel at a Nebulas in California. And he came over and he showed Joe a picture of the cover of the Forever War floating in the space station that he had taken.
Yeah.
And then he sent us that cover with all the details of
Yeah.
when it went up and when it went down, how long it was in space. It was just wonderful. So we see him as often as we can. We're very fond of him.
That's a great space souvenir.
Isn't it
Yeah.
great? Oh my God, can't have anything better than that.
Did you meet any interesting people while you were doing your sessions in MIT?
Oh, yeah.
So usually some interesting people going in and out of that university.
Well, the obvious one is Isaac Asimov. We met him. He came to lecture.
We already knew
But
him.
we already knew him from fandom. So,
Right.
hi, Isaac. And so it was old home week. Yeah.
And we met the guy who wrote Goodell, Asher Bach,
Yeah.
because what's his name? I can't think of his name. I'm terrible with names, and I used to be the person with the names.
Yeah. But anyhow, he came to MIT just lecturing, and went to an MIT science fiction club.
Physics club.
Physics club, sorry.
And they invited Joe too.
Yeah. And so I got to sit with him, and he was really, he wanted to talk about SF. And
That was great.
so he was sort of escaping from the MIT physicists to talk to me.
The kids were scared to talk to the two of them, and they
Yeah.
ended up just talking to each other. And
Yeah.
it was so much fun.
Yeah.
Who else did we? Alan Lightman
Yeah.
is a friend. He was the
Mhm.
head of our department.
Yeah, in the chat, someone put in, was that Douglas Hofstetter?
Yes, yes,
Oh, yeah. Douglas
yes,
Hofstadter.
yes. I'm
Yeah.
sorry his name didn't pop into my head.
Yeah.
He was so pleasant. I'd like to see him again.
Yeah.
Who else? Oh, another astronaut, Mike Fink.
Mike Fink. Yeah.
Both of these
Oh.
guys, by the way, are on the list of people who might go to the moon.
Yeah.
That they put out a while back. Mike Fink was at a Nebulas too, and we went up to meet him, and he said, you know, if I hadn't done so poorly in your science fiction class at MIT, I might not have been an astronaut.
Really?
Yep.
Joe, did you fail an astronaut?
No,
Oh,
didn't
no,
fail.
no, in fact, I applied. But when I applied,
oh, he applied to be
Yeah.
an astronaut. He's not
Yeah.
No.
talking about that. He's talking about Mike Fink.
Oh,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, Joe applied to be an astronaut. He wanted to be an astronaut.
Really?
I didn't have a chance. I'm no athlete. I never was. And really, that was more important than IQ or anything like that. So, yeah, I didn't have a chance, but that didn't mean I wouldn't try. And so me and 20,000 other people who had appropriate degrees and the ambition to be astronauts applied. And NASA had a pretty good bureaucratic structure handling us without disappointing us. And actually, they had their own way. I mean, first of all, fly a jet plane for about at least 1,000 hours, and then we can talk. But most people can't get that kind of flight time just at their local airport. So usually do it through the military.
And often they were test pilots. Anyway,
Well, I mean, would you want to get on a spaceship with somebody who hadn't been a test pilot?
it would have been difficult to get me on a spaceship, no matter what. I did sit in one of the capsules. I couldn't fit.
No, really?
The capsule, the astronauts were relatively small men.
Yeah.
When I worked there, I had a chance to work on on pad 39 and when it was loaded. And
Wow.
so it was one of the technician friends of mine let me sit in it. And it was,
Right.
let's just say I couldn't get in.
Oh my goodness.
But if any of you know me, you know I'm not thin. Anyway, let's get back to you. Did you always want to be a professional writer? Joe?
Yes, I did. I can say that actually without any qualification. But I wasn't thinking about being only a writer as a profession. I always thought that I would be doing something else as well as writing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't realize was that something else would be university professor. I
No
mean,
plans for
that
that.
was never on my wish list, and it never even occurred to me. Actually, I was down in Mexico in San Miguel de Allende, this little tourist town, and one of the drunks I was talking with said, you know, there's a program you ought to look into at the University of Iowa. It's for professional writers, and you could get in on the GI Bill. You could use your service record to get 2 free years of graduate school. I said, yeah, you know, I'd never heard of that. And in fact, I went home and one of the first things we did was I wrote to Iowa. And for some reason they said, this is weird. Why don't we accept this guy? And so and then Gay applied to the linguistics program, and we both got graduate assistantships, which was great for a writer because it's like a paycheck for breathing. It's wonderful.
So we had the GI Bill and our
Yeah.
2 graduate assistantships. So that made us some of the richest graduate students. And he was writing and making money.
Yeah.
And so we fed a lot of people. Had a lot of parties.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the science fiction community that you've experienced from the 60s to more recent times. Many of us have always looked almost at science fiction as a family because we've developed such good friends. Has that been something that you identified with, and has it changed any as you've become more and more well-known?
I don't think it's changed all that much. I mean, we were fans from the time I started publishing. And we've never gaffiated in the sense of going, oh, well, we're just too good for that. So we've stayed with fandom and have never actually regretted it. I mean, you always have odd people coming by and bending your ear and sort of wasting your time and that sort of thing. But it's easy to gaffiate if you really have to. But we have had a good time.
One of the wonderful things about his being a well-known professional is that he started getting guest of honor offers from overseas. They would go, and the conventions would be run by fans, and they were wonderful. And we would meet the other authors and the other fans. We have essentially family in Spain, in France, in Romania, in Canada, in Mexico, people that we are that close to and stay close to. And a lot of it's got to do with the conventions we were invited to.
Well, international fandom. Yeah.
And people are so much the same.
Yeah.
Can I tell a story?
Oh, don't.
You've heard them all.
Oh, then it must. Then you must.
We were in Jersey, and there was an American restaurant, and our dear French friends were there, and our dear Spanish friends were there. And I probably said this, I speak Spanish and a little bit of French. So I said, why don't we all go to an American restaurant and see if it's really American? And the French said, well, we don't like Spaniards very much. And the Spaniards said, well, we don't like French people very much. And they didn't know each other. I said, well, come on. We'll all just go and see if this is a real American restaurant. And they came. And we had a wonderful time. I did a lot of translating and stuff, and it was great fun, and everybody liked each other, and there was no animosity at all. The food was not very American, but pretty American. It was pretty good. So we had to leave the next morning early, but we found out later that they met for breakfast. They liked each other, and they met for breakfast.
So you introduced even people from other countries.
To each other. That was so much fun.
I was going to ask you about a story that you told Edie and I once about going to Russia because you couldn't get your money out of Russia even though they said that they would pay you for the material that was published there. And could you maybe tell people how you discovered who your escort was?
Oh,
you remember?
The KGB guy.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that was the financial part of that was just too convoluted and uninteresting.
We didn't bother with it.
But we basically we wound up with the KGB man as our interpreter.
He was Roger Zelazny was with us, and he was a Roger Zelazny fan.
He was a real Zelazny fan, and by by Soviet standards, he was a Zelazny completist, an expert. So, but it was not a social event the way we normally see them in the United States. It was heavily politicized, but we accepted that. That's the way it is. You're there as a propaganda
Mhm.
tool for the Soviets. But the Russian writers were tremendously interested and interesting. It was great for us because we were there for a long time and met God knows how many people, traveled all around the Soviet Union.
Moscow, Leningrad,
Kiev.
Kiev.
Yeah.
Kiev was my favorite place.
Yeah, me too.
And this guy was in Kiev, and he didn't say that he was KGB, but he was able to be with us all the time, pretending he was there because he was a fan, you see.
Yeah.
But when we went to a restaurant, some guy asked Joe something, and Joe couldn't answer because it was Russian. And the guy said, "Passport, passport."
Yeah.
And our friend went in and told him in
Yeah.
no uncertain Russian,
He had his own
to
little bag.
go away. And he took off.
Yeah.
And then we kind of knew. But then we were on a bus and we'd gone out to a real Ukrainian dinner, old fashioned, traditional,
Oh,
had
yeah.
way too much vodka. And this guy, and we had invited this guy to go with us, and he did. And on the way back, we're singing American patriotic songs. So I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, "What do you think of all this?" And he said, "It's Americans being real American."
Yeah. Which wasn't, it was actually Americans being real science fiction fans.
And drunk.
And drunk ones at that, yeah. But we were doing George M. Cohan songs,
It's
No.
a right old flag.
Yeah.
So that was quite an experience. And we met the Strugatsky brothers.
Yeah, that was fun.
Did you?
Yes,
And they were
We-
terrific.
they were fine people.
I said, "How do you collaborate?" Joe collaborated with his brother. How do you collaborate with each other? And what's it? Boris said,
Of course.
one of us sits at the typewriter and the other stands behind him and tells him how wrong he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, with that, how did you collaborate with Jay?
It was much less sociable. Jay and I started out simply mailing manuscripts back and forth. That is to say, I would write with something and mail it to him, and he would rewrite it and mail it back to me, and I would rewrite it again. And then we'd sort of grumpily go, okay, and send it off to the magazine. We were never, there was no animosity between us, but we didn't collaborate well, I've got to admit. So basically, I had the name and I could publish anything that I wrote. And my brother did not. But he was a good writer. But it's it was a very competitive field at the time. And Jay found it a lot easier to get published.
Well, you started out with a big splash, especially in the science fiction community.
Yeah.
Did you ever think there were any bad parts of starting out with such a big splash?
Not really. There were some people who thought that my success did not just reflect my literary ability or my literary value, that I had sort of capitalized on being a veteran and
Really?
yeah. I mean, they say, well, so he was a big fucking, he was a big old hero. And so he could get published and get famous and so forth. But those people talk.
Yeah. I didn't even know that you were a veteran. I figured you must have been after reading, but
no,
I read the Forever War first. So
yeah, very few people in fandom knew me as a veteran rather than as a fellow fan.
Writer, yeah.
Yeah, writer.
When Mindbridge came out, it was Forever War had great success. Mindbridge came out and they sold the they went to
Paperback
sell the
rights.
paperback rights. Ballantine had bought this paperback rights to the Forever War and had been pretty successful. Judy Lynn Del Rey and Lester were at Ballantine. Mindbridge came out, and Judy Lynn took us to lunch and told us everything she thought was wrong with Mindbridge. And it was like she was talking about a book we'd never heard of.
Yeah.
I
Oh.
have never had an experience like that. It was like it was
That's
some
weird.
other book. I don't know what that was about, but she was going to reject it. So we were mopey. We went home. They submitted it, the hardcover publisher, St. Martin, submitted it to Avon.
Avon.
And the head of Avon, who was not a science fiction fan, fell in love with the book and offered $100,000 for it. Holy cow. No one
Wow.
had ever
And this
gotten
is,
that.
the thing is, I think the guy did not know how much that was to a
No.
science fiction.
I'm sure he
writer.
didn't.
Because that was only that was a moderately high advance for a paperback mainstream book.
Mhm.
But the highest any science fiction book had made was half that, not even half that.
So
So-
when the book came out, Lester Del Rey of Ballantine reviewed not the book, but the advance,
Yeah.
and just creamed it. Just thought that was the most awful thing, that a science fiction writer would get that kind of money, and on and on and on and on. And he was mad at us for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Well, he couldn't disagree
Yeah,
with Judy Lynn.
no, but it wasn't that. I think he was quite serious about that.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
but that's
well.
weird. But the funny part of $100,000 advance is that half of it goes to the hardcover publisher, so half of it goes to us, $50,000, and it's spread out over 3 years. That's
Mhm.
$50,000 spread, and 10% to the agent on top of that. So that's $40,000 spread over 3 years.
Yep.
You can't quite live on that even back then.
Yeah.
So, but we showed this contract that didn't even have Joe's name on it to a bank, and they gave us a mortgage.
Remember that?
That is good.
Yeah.
And life got better. And we were more stable.